Class President, Chapter 5, A Gooey Mess. When Julio got home, Nilsson was in the kitchen cutting up vegetables for dinner. Can you make brownies? Julio asked him. I have to make some for a bake sale at school on Friday, but I don't know how. Nilsson shrugged his shoulders. You can buy brownie mix at the supermarket, he suggested. Everything you need will be in the box, and it will have directions to show you what to do. Great, shouted Julio with relief. Making brownies wouldn't be so hard if all the ingredients came together in one box. Julio was even happier when he convinced Nilsson to lend him $5 so he could go shopping to get the brownie mix right away. Julio had given his own money to Arthur, and even if he hadn't, he doubted that 27 cents would have gone very far toward his purchase. I'll pay you back, Julio promised Nilsson. Sure, said Nilsson, grinning. Put it in the glove compartment of that car you're going to buy me with your $1 million. At the supermarket, Julio found a whole row of shelves filled with mixes to make cakes, cookies, gingerbread, and 100 other desserts. The pictures on the boxes looked delicious. Julio took 3 different boxes of brownie mix off the shelves and studied them carefully. Finally, he picked the box that had the best picture, even though it cost 20 cents more than the others. He decided to buy 2 boxes so he could make twice as many brownies. After supper, Julio showed his mother the packages of brownie mix. Can you help me make this? He asked. Mrs. Sanchez read the instructions on one of the boxes. It's easy, she said. You just add a couple things to the mix and bake it in the oven. Can we do it now? Asked Julio. I have to take them to school on Friday. This is only Tuesday, said Mrs. Sanchez. If we do it now, the brownies will be stale by Friday. They will be gone by Friday, Julio's grandmother said in Spanish. She was probably right, thought Julio. It would be awful if he baked the brownies and they were all eaten before he got them to school. Okay, Thursday night, said Julio. We'll make the brownies then. Wednesday's school lunch was tacos with cheese and lettuce, buttered corn, and baked beans. The Thursday menu featured oven-fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. It was heaven after all those peanut butter sandwiches. Everyone was eagerly awaiting the bake sale. Cricket and Zoe had made big colorful signs at home and had brought them to school to advertise the event. In fact, Cricket was so involved with the bake sale that she stopped talking about the class election. Still, she did bring a bag of tiny chocolate bars in her lunch, and she gave one to every kid in the class. Julio was sure it was a bribe to get them to vote for her for class president. Arthur Lewis came to school wearing his old glasses. Although his parents had been upset that his glasses were broken on the second day of school, he felt pretty important too. After all, if he hadn't broken his glasses, there wouldn't be a class bake sale. After supper on Thursday evening, Julio took his 2 boxes of brownie mix from the kitchen cabinet. Can you help me? He asked his mother. Mrs. Sanchez had just sat down on the living room sofa. Oh, Julio, she sighed, I have an awful headache tonight. Please ask your brother to help you. If you get stuck, let me know. Ramon was taking a class that evening, but Nilsson was glad to be released from his homework. I like your homework much better than mine, said Nilsson as he read the directions on the box. Julio opened one of the packages of brownie mix. Inside was just some brown powder. Julio hoped he wasn't going to be cheated by the company that sold this stuff. Sure doesn't look like any brownies I ever saw, he said. Of course not. Needs 2 eggs and water and cooking oil added to it, said Nilsson. Julio went to the refrigerator. There's 2 packages, so we need 4 eggs. Nilsson found a large bowl in the cupboard, and the boys broke the eggs into it. Then they emptied the 2 boxes into the bowl. Julio began to mix the eggs and powder together while Nilsson filled a measuring cup with water and then added the oil. Julio and Nilsson took turns stirring the gooey mixture. Julio stuck his finger in the bowl for a taste. Hey, he said suddenly, where are the nuts? Why do you need nuts? Asked Nilsson. Julio looked inside the empty boxes. I like brownies with nuts. I promised that there would be nuts in my brownies. So go get some. It's not too late, said Nilsson. He gave Julio $2 more, and Julio rushed off to the supermarket. 20 minutes later, he returned home with a cellophane bag filled with walnuts. Why did you get nuts with shells? Asked Nilsson. All nuts have shells, said Julio. That's how they grow. We learned that back in 1st grade. Dumb kid, said Nilsson. You can buy them already shelled. Now we have to crack them open. He looked around for something heavy to use. Julio took a heavy pot from the cupboard. Nilsson took another one. They put the nuts on the floor and began to pound them. "I didn't know squirrels had to work so hard," Nelson complained. Mrs. Sanchez came into the kitchen to investigate. "This is not good medicine for a headache," she chided her sons. Someone was banging at the front door. It was like an echo of the banging in the kitchen. Julio went to check. He looked through the peephole and saw their downstairs neighbor, Mr. Finley. "Is everything okay?" the old man asked when Julio opened the door. "Sure," said Julio, "everything's fine." "I heard an awful banging, and I thought something was the matter." Julio's mother went to the door. She invited their neighbor in for a cup of tea. Finally, after half an hour of hitting nuts and fingers, all the walnut shells were cracked, and there was a whole pile of broken walnut pieces. Nelson gathered them up and threw them into the bowl of brownie batter. "At last we're done," he said. "This is as hard as my algebra homework. Maybe harder." "These aren't brownies yet," protested Julio. "Of course not. We have to bake them." The box said to heat the oven to 350 degrees. Julio poured the gooey, chocolatey mess into a big pan. Nelson stuck the pan inside the oven. "It's 8:15, said Nelson. "Watch the clock and call me when it's 8:45. I'm going to go do some relaxing algebra in the meantime." Julio sat down at the kitchen table. He looked at the clock. "Only 29 more minutes to go." He ran his finger along the inside of the bowl and licked the batter off his finger. Then he picked up one of the empty boxes of brownie mix and read the directions again. They had done everything just right. Julio noticed that in very tiny print it said, "Optional. Nuts may be added." The picture on the box showed nuts sticking out of the brownies. It didn't seem very honest if the nuts weren't in the box. Julio turned back to the directions. The box said, "Bake for 30 minutes in a greased baking pan." "Nelson!" he shouted. He ran into the bedroom where Nelson was doing his homework and listening to loud rock music at the same time. "Did we grease the baking pan?" Nelson threw down his pencil and rushed into the living room to tell his mother. Julio followed. "Did we do something wrong?" he asked. Mrs. Sanchez ran into the kitchen and grabbed a pot holder. She pulled the pan of brownies from the oven. They were still a gooey mess. "Give me the bowl," she said to Julio. Julio grabbed the bowl that he had put in the sink, and Mrs. Sanchez tipped the pan and poured the hot batter back into the bowl. Julio's grandmother and Mr. Finley came to the kitchen to see what was going on. "If you don't grease the pan, the brownies will stick to it," Mrs. Sanchez explained. When the batter was back in the bowl, Mrs. Sanchez put the pan in the sink and washed it out. "What are you doing?" Julio asked anxiously. It looked as if they were working backward. Soon, they would remove the nuts from the brownies and put them back in the walnut shells. "Get me the margarine from the refrigerator," said Mrs. Sanchez. Julio put half a stick of margarine on the counter. His mother handed the baking dish to Nelson, who dried it quickly with the dish towel. Mrs. Sanchez cut off a piece of margarine, and with a bit of paper towel, she rubbed it all over the bottom of the pan. "This is greasing the pan," she explained. "It's not something they teach you at school," said Nelson. "Will the brownies still turn out okay?" asked Julio. "They smell good to me," said Mr. Finley. Nelson poured the batter back into the pan and slid it into the oven. Julio looked at the clock. It was 9:15. By 9 o'clock, the whole apartment began to smell like chocolate brownies. Promptly at 9:15, Nelson went and opened the oven. He took out the pan. The brownies looked good, and they smelled even better. Julio's mother and grandmother and Mr. Finley came back to the kitchen. Julio hoped that they wouldn't all want to taste his brownies. There might be nothing left for selling at school. But when the brownies cooled and Nelson helped them cut into small squares, they only nibbled at the tiny crumbs that fell off. "It really worked," said Julio as he helped himself to one of the larger crumbs. "I really made brownies." "You made brownies," said Nelson, giving him a nudge. "What about me?" "We made brownies," said Julio, correcting himself. "Aren't you glad I let you help me with my homework?